So yeah, my name is David Borish. I'm a researcher and a filmmaker. Originally from Ottawa. I'm currently living in Toronto, but I've had the privilege of working in Labrador as well as other parts of the Eastern Arctic for about 8 years now. In particular, working with Jamie as well as other community partners based in Nunatsiavut and elsewhere. My particular interests are on the human dimensions of wildlife conservation and using visual media in particular as a tool for documenting and gathering and making sense of different connections to land and animals and coming from a well-being angle as well. And so a lot of the work that I started doing in Labrador was focused on the loss of caribou and what that meant for people from kind of a holistic well-being angle. And youth were a big part of that work as well, documenting how youth understood and related to caribou. And after finishing that, which was my doctoral work, I got more involved with working with Jamie and the Torngat Secretariat and on a variety of different projects, but one of them being this iWell project, which I'll share my screen right now. But yeah, just excited to be talking about this new project. It's been in the works for about a year now, but it's really building on a variety of educational and research and land-based work that the Torngat Secretariat has been working on for a number of years. And yeah, excited to be sharing a bit about what we've been up to over the past year, some of the lessons learned, and kind of where we're headed with this project. And uh, Jamie, if you have anything to share along the way, feel free to just let me know. But before I begin, I just want to say that this is a project that's being led by a diverse team, and unfortunately, not everyone could make it to today. But that includes, of course, Jamie, but also people coming from more of an educational background, including Ola Anderson and Colleen Pottle, who both have direct experience working in schools and education in Nunatsiavut in Labrador and also teaching wildlife-related content and education to youth. We're also working with Sylvia Moore, who's coming from more of a research background on education, Indigenous education, associated with Memorial University. We're also working with Derek Pottle and Franklin Flowers, who are both knowledge holders in the community of Riglet, and they've been the people that have been able to help with some of the programming, the youth programming that we've been running over the past year. So really the people on the ground doing a lot of the work. And then myself helping out with the kind of research and coordination of this broader project. There's a variety of other people that we're working with, but these are some of the core team members. And so we're really coming from a kind of interdisciplinary background to carry out this work. And just to give kind of a high level overview of the main threads of this project, it's really coming at this project from a variety of different angles. It's a research project in the sense that we're trying to understand youth experiences with land and well-being and culture. It's also education. It's place-based education, land-based education. It's connected to culture and cultural preservation, cultural continuity. All that is intersecting with the intergenerational aspects of this work as well, trying to pass on knowledge from mentors and knowledge holders who are older and have the experience down to youth and younger generations who may not have this kind of land-based, place-based understanding. Um, as a project that is led by the Torngat Wildlife Plants and Fisheries Secretariat, it's also deeply connected with wildlife conservation, trying to connect youth with wildlife, with lands, and importantly, trying to convey meanings of stewardship and respect for land and how that's all connected to culture and education. And then, of course, well-being and broadly health being an important thread of this work as well, trying to understand how all these different pieces are influencing youth well-being across Nunatsiavut. And relating to that, our project is kind of based in the idea of the Inuit social determinants of health, which I'm sure many of you already know about, but essentially it's the non-medical factors that are influencing health perceptions and health outcomes in communities. And within Nunatsiavut, this ranges from the social aspects, the cultural aspects, the emotional aspects of connecting to land and water and wildlife, and how all of these things have played a really important role in Inuit well-being for many, many generations. And really trying to understand how all of this is connected to senses of mental health and senses of well-being. Um, and we're also understanding things like knowledge transmission, as mentioned, the intergenerational aspects, place-based understandings, how all this plays a role in youth well-being. Um, some of the challenges, though, in recent years, and this is not necessarily unique to Nunatsiavut, but the preservation of cultural knowledge and connections to land have been influenced by a variety of different factors, including environmental changes, climate changes, people's relationships with the land and animals have been changing as the ice is melting in different ways. There are different weather pattern changes. There are fluctuations or changes in wildlife, including caribou, that are all having an influence on how people are able to interact with the natural world and therefore interact with their senses of well-being. And of course, there's also various colonial forces that have been and continue to play a role in how people are connected to the land and animals, including how people are more tied to their communities. And so within some of this context, there has been this urgency to try to address some of these challenges, support Inuit mental health and identity through trying to reconnect people to land-based learning, reconnect people to their relationships with wildlife. And there's been this opportunity that I guess was more or less envisioned several years ago around how the Torngat Secretariat could help facilitate some of these different experiences for youth. The Secretariat is focused on wildlife conservation, but a huge part of that is connected to communities and people and knowledge of animals. And so playing this role as a facilitator of culture-based and land-based intergenerational opportunities has been something that has been starting to carry out by the Tongaat Secretariat. And part of this started a few years ago with an initiative called Tutukianik, which essentially means to go caribou hunting. And the idea here is that there's been a caribou hunting ban in Labrador for more than a decade now. And so youth in particular, some of them have never even seen a caribou or tasted caribou or understand how to go out and find and track and hunt caribou. And this is in contrast to older generations who, in some cases, relied on caribou meat almost every day. So there's this clear loss of this connection to an animal that has played a role in people's understandings of wildlife and land more broadly. And so there were two different trips that were organized, one in 2022, bringing youth out on the land, mainly from Nain, north of Nain, to go and track caribou. And of course, they weren't able to go and hunt caribou, but they could at least go and try to learn the ways of finding and learning place-based knowledge and the likes. And then another one last year was organized that took youth out from Hopedale, Postville, and Makovic, and it was a similar thing, going out to try to find caribou and learn that information. And none of these trips ended up resulting in actually seeing caribou, in part because there's very few caribou around those areas. But in a way that was almost like a side point. Really, it was still this benefit of bringing youth out onto the land and reconnecting to some of these cultural experiences. And so this initiative really took a multi-day youth experience approach, in the sense that it was bringing a handful of youth out for multiple days, camping overnight out on land, and really having that like one experience during the season, which had a lot of really important benefits. But one of the things that came up through this work was also that there could be opportunities to facilitate culture experiences that aren't just like a one trip per year situation, or not just that one multi-day trip, but instead to provide more consistent opportunities. And so this is then kind of led into more directly with this iWell project, supporting a program that we're running called the Rigolet Land Learning Program. And this is, instead of focusing on a variety of different communities across Nunatsiavut, this is focused on one community in Rigolet, and trying to provide these culture-based activities, land-based activities on a regular basis. And so this started in January this year, and the intention was to uh, pretty much every other weekend, or every few weekends, have some kind of activity. Maybe it's after school, or just a day on the weekend where youth can take part for maybe a few hours or even a full day, just to have a bit more of that connection. And so the main idea was to bring youth out on these land trips, and we were able to bring and facilitate some of these activities. You can see some photos here of some boil ups, what they call them, just going out for a fire and some food. And this happened a few times, not too far away from Rigolet, but it was still just essentially a way of getting youth out on a nice day, to just get out of town and enjoy the land. And hear from, in particular, Derek Pottle, who is the main mentor and lead behind this work, hearing his place-based knowledge, hearing him tell stories. And we were hoping to do a lot more of these land-based trips throughout this winter, but unfortunately, we were really quite affected by the weather conditions in and around Rigolet. And I mean, this is the case across Labrador and other parts of the Eastern Arctic, but it was really a challenging winter for getting out. This is an extreme photo of this is back in March, where so much of the snow had melted. It wasn't always like that, but just to give you a sense of how inaccessible it was to get out to some of these places. These are some photos taken in February and March, when it was supposed to be, some of the best conditions of going out, but it was so warm. There was such little snow to be able to get out. There was flooding in certain areas, and this was really a major barrier to being able to bring youth out on a consistent basis. So we had to pivot a little bit, and unfortunately not bring youth out on the land as much, but we were still able to do some activities in town that were focused on that kind of culture-based learning. And some of these activities included snare making, learning how to create snares that ideally they would be able to bring out and maybe trap some wildlife. Um, Mint making was a key one. Youth took part. A handful of youth took part on I guess over the course of a few weeks, on multiple occasions, going to learn how to make sealskin mitts. And all the while we were working on this project, we're working with local knowledge holders who have these skills to be able to teach youth. Another very short activity was just the basics of learning comatic making, and they weren't able to actually create a full comatic, but they could at least hear from Derek in particular, some of the process of the traditional approach of making a comatic. Fish hook making was another activity. You can see a lot of these activities were in kind of the woodworking shed in town. And this was just a quick opportunity for them to create these fish hooks that ideally they'll be using later this summer. Seal skinning was another activity that some youth took part in. This was a seal that Derek had freshly hunted, and so they had an opportunity to actually learn how to go about preparing that sealskin. So a variety of different activities that we were still able to carry out, but it kind of kept coming back to this point of, the conditions just weren't good, and they were not ideal at all for this kind of understanding of the land, at least during the winter time. And even on the days that we were able to go out, we found that a lot of the youth, their skidoos were overheating just because there wasn't enough snow. So definitely a major challenge and learning from this past season. But within some of this context, we started to reach out to other groups and learn about, what are other people doing in terms of land-based learning. And one of the groups that we reached out to was a group related to the Department of Health and Social Development in Nunatsiavut. And we learned that there were some people organizing a youth trip to Hebron in northern Labrador, north of Nain. And so we kind of developed a relationship with them that ended up being a really great thing. In particular, we worked with Ocean Wyatt, who was the main kind of lead behind this project. And their intention was to go out and actually carry out the first caribou hunt for youth in Labrador in more than a decade. And this is not the George River herd, which is really across Labrador, but more focused on the Torngat caribou herd in northern Labrador. So there was a lot of planning that went into organizing this, bringing youth from different communities, including Nain, Makovic, and Rigolet, um, to go and try to find caribou and hunt them and really share that experience. So I had the opportunity of joining on this trip as well, and we kind of saw this as a collaboration or early stages of a partnership, because of our shared values of youth land-based learning. So hopefully you can see some of these videos play, but uh, I don't know if you can hear that at all. It was pretty loud on my end. But yeah, we were able to go out on it ended up being a 4-day trip north of Nain. And the first day was just beautiful. Let me see if I can switch this. We went into these beautiful mountains. The conditions were just incredible heading up towards Hebron. And the youth, you could tell kind of as soon as we left Nain that they were just having a really, really great time and kind of smiles all around. But unfortunately, I'm just going to pause that because it's a bit loud on my end. Unfortunately, once we got up to Hebron, we ended up having the opposite problem that we had in Rigolet, where we had a massive snowstorm come in. And when we were supposed to be spending multiple days trying to look for caribou into the beautiful Torngat Mountains, we ended up spending pretty much 2.5, 3 days stuck in cabin. So this was a huge bummer, because it was about 12 people in one small cabin for many days. So a bummer, but it was still a great opportunity to still, just get out of town. Here's another visual of us trying to get out a little bit, but we just couldn't. It was so much snow, and even going a little bit outside the cabin was dangerous because there are polar bears in that area, and so there were pretty strict rules on how youth couldn't go more than 20 meters kind of thing outside of the cabin, just because of those safety conditions. So it ended up being a lot of time together in small quarters, but still a great opportunity. If you look in the background of this image, you might be able to see faintly the a church. And this is one activity that we ended up doing because it was right in Hebron. We were able to go into this church, and youth had a really interesting experience looking at old photos of their ancestors that they related to, mainly from Hopedale, Makovic, and Nain. But this was at least something that wasn't exactly land-based learning, but it was still kind of connecting with their ancestral ties to the region. We also had a lot of experiences trying to get back where honestly things just didn't really work out. There was Cometix breaking, there was skidoos breaking down. We could barely see. The conditions were so poor. So a lot of things weren't working out. But at the same time, we all kind of reflected on that this is part of going out on the land, and this was still a really important learning opportunity for youth to take part in, to see how, when you deal with a breakdown, like what do you do? How do you ensure that everyone's safe in these conditions as well? So all to say that it didn't work out exactly as we had hoped in terms of trying to find caribou, but it was still a really important opportunity for youth to get out and enjoy some time out on the land. And after this experience, and also during, we a big part of this work is not only facilitating these opportunities for youth to get out, but as mentioned earlier in this presentation, is that there's this overarching research objective behind this project. Because there's so many people that are trying to get out, there's youth being given these opportunities to experience different cultural-based, land-based activities. This iWell project is really at the heart trying to understand what does this all mean and how can this contribute to future programming. And so an overarching research question for this project is how do culture-based and land-based intergenerational teaching and learning experiences of wildlife contribute to youth self-concept and positive mental wellness? Essentially, we're trying to understand what do all these culture-based, land-based activities mean for youth well-being and mental health. And so we're still in the somewhat early phases of this research aspect, because we have only gone through a few months of interviewing youth that have been taking part in these activities. This has been a mix of interviewing people on past trips, including those caribou trips that I mentioned earlier, as well as current programming in Rigolet, as well as on the Hebron trip. And so there's not tons to share at this point, but I did want to share some of the overarching themes that have started to emerge. Um, One of them is that in the interviews, we're starting to ask people about what their experiences are like in town, in communities, without this kind of these land-based experiences. And there's been a mix of feelings shared, but generally, a lot of youth have expressed the feeling of being trapped in communities, including this quote: "It feels like I'm more trapped or crowded and needs to get out on the land or go fishing or something." A lot of you talked about feeling anxious, feeling more sad, and just overall some negative feelings of being in town. And of course, it's not all negative feelings. There's a lot of great things happening in various communities, but in terms of this connection to land, a lot of youth have expressed this kind of trapped aspect. Another thing that we've been exploring a bit, and this in some ways is completely disconnected from land-based learning, but in many ways it's part of the story, is what they're actually doing in town. And this ranges from youth doing a lot of sports, spending a lot of time with family and school. But one core thing that's been coming up is their time on the internet and social media. And of course, this isn't unique to the United States, but this is youth all over the world, really. But it was really interesting to talk about youth experiences and relationships with social media. And one of the questions that we've been asking is, how much time are you spending on these things? And the range is from 3 to 7 hours per day. And some youth have really, expressed how they're spending 6 to 7 hours either on social media, Facebook, or playing video games. And upon reflecting on that, I don't think anyone's overjoyed about that. They kind of know that that's not ideal. It's just that's what they're doing. And this is one of the quotes that related to that. Like at home, you don't really do nothing just on your phone. This is not the kind of life we should be living. Relating more to the land trips, then, we started asking people like, how do you feel about going on the land? What does that mean? How does that relate to your well-being? And there is this positive idea that generally going out can be beneficial for youth mental wellness. This is one of the quotes. I feel like the land would maybe heal someone from a deep depression. There's too much negativity in town, and when you're on the land, you got nothing to worry about. So there is, and the amount of the number of youth who we've interviewed has not been that many yet, but uh, those that we have talked to have kind of shared this understanding that when they go out, they feel better. And one of the youth on the Hebron trip explicitly said that this trip healed me a lot, and that was at the end of the trip when we had just been through a whole snowstorm. We were stuck in cabin for a few days. There were all these breakdowns and all these things, and yet still there was this sense that I'd rather be doing all that and going through that experience than just staying in town. And this one youth also shared that it doesn't always take week-long trips to feel better. Sometimes it's just getting out for a day or a half day, and it has that kind of healing effect. So this might be consistent with other youth that we work with in the future. Another thing, I mean, you talked about a variety of different things that come up as they're on the land, but one of them that I found interesting was creativity. When you said that when you're off on the land, you can do so much more in this way. Your creativity comes out when you're off on the land. And this was again after being in cabin for a few days, but you could tell the youth were still antsy to do something. And so one of the things that they did, they couldn't go caribou hunting, but they tried to catch little snowbirds. And they spent hours doing that right outside the cabin, and they seemed to have a great time doing that. So this kind of self-reflection of how they can become more creative when they're out on the land was interesting. Another feeling that seems to be pretty common is the feeling of freedom. When you said it feels more free, and I'd be doing anything you want, like no one telling you you gotta be this way, but it's way better than the land. It feels more like fresh. Um, Not all that is totally clear there, but yeah, just this common theme of feeling free and feeling like you can kind of do what you want when you get out on the land, which might not be the full case when you're in communities. We have mainly focused on talking with youth, but we have also talked with some mentors who have led these trips, including the past caribou hunting trips. And so it's been interesting to hear some mentor perspectives on, what does it mean to pass on this knowledge? What are their relationships to the land? What do they want youth to know in the future? And one mentor in particular talked about how the land is just it's a huge part of his memory and his identity, and to not have that, it's almost like, as he says here, your happy time is gone. And a lot of youth, or sorry, a lot of mentors through this work, and also just from my previous experience on the caribou work, that they are concerned that youth aren't learning the kind of cultural skills, the cultural knowledge, the place-based understandings that are so deeply tied to people's well-being. And so there is this, again, this urgency of trying to pass on this knowledge, especially before those who have the knowledge pass on. So all to say, it's still early stages on the research side, but we're collecting a variety of information through these land-based, culture-based activities. And we hope from this broad research that there will be a variety of different benefits. One being that we hope to better understand this connection between youth identity, youth well-being, land, wildlife learning, in the hopes of that supporting to future land-based activities and programming, and doing so in ways that can be most effective and also most accessible for youth across Nunatsiavu. And just to share a little bit about next steps with this program, again, as mentioned, this winter was very difficult for weather reasons, so we've reoriented to more of summer trips around mainly boating, fishing, and we're going to be doing the first one in Rigolet in just next week, actually, the second week of June. So we're really looking forward to seeing how that works out, and just fingers crossed that the weather plays out. Um, in the event that it doesn't, which is still a very strong possibility, we're continuing to brainstorm around Plan B activities. So, what are things that can continue to happen in communities when youth aren't able to get out on the land as much? Um, we plan to continue to collect data through interviews with youth throughout these activities, as well as kind of right after these activities. A lot of youth have been comfortable talking over the phone about some of these concepts. Some of them have, at least in my experience, been quite shy to talk about some of these topics, especially around mental health. And so it's been a bit of playing around with, what are the best ways of accessing this information in ways that are comfortable for them, but also get at the kind of heart of what we're trying to look at. Um, and it's also continuing to try to do interviews with youth from past trips, and trying to make space for that as well. So, anyways, hopefully this provides a general overview of what we've been up to, what our project's about. We will hopefully have more to share in the next while, but yeah, looking forward to any questions you have and any discussion that might come from this as well.